Welcome to the Settlement Pros Podcast. Here's your host, Jack Milligan.
All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Settlement Pros Podcast. I am your host, Jack Milligan. I've spent over 30 years as a settlement planner, pre-mediation consultant, and financial advisor to over 1,400 plaintiffs across the country. I have met the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to trial attorneys. And I interview the best trial lawyers for this podcast and the best settlement experts across the country to uncover their true stories and to enable injury victims to more easily find the true settlement pros out there amongst trial lawyers. And to be a true settlement pro, you have to be a trial lawyer that tries cases. Trial lawyers that go in the courtroom have the respect of the defendants, and they know that trial lawyer will meet them, will drop the hammer and meet them in the courtroom to tell their client's story to a jury, and they're willing to go for it, win, lose, or draw. So the credit belongs to those who are actually in the arena, and that arena is the courtroom. So today's guest is Dave Miller. Dave is a veteran trial lawyer for more than 36 years. He's been litigating medical malpractice cases in the Portland, Oregon area. And for the first 18 years of his career, he defended physicians and other medical providers in courtrooms throughout Oregon, as well as in other states. But beginning in the year 2000, Dave shifted his practice from defending medical professionals to representing injured patients. There are a few lawyers in Oregon with more courtroom experience litigating medical negligence cases than Dave, and there are none with his depth of experience representing both physicians and patients. David,
Jack,
welcome to the podcast.
good to be here, friend.
Yeah, great to finally have you on. So,
When you said good, bad, and the ugly, I hope I'm tending toward the good side and not the ugly side. We'll find out.
definitely. So I've done a few of these podcasts for the listening audience. We are doing this on November 19th, 2020. So it's we're still in the middle of now we're in a new lockdown according to the governor.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm in my office, socially distanced, and Dave, it looks like you're in a really nice study somewhere. So
I'm actually in our Pacific City office again.
Oh, okay, very good. At the coast.
Yeah.
Very good. So yeah, I've seen a lot of good attorneys, and I've seen a few bad ones, and I've actually been pretty fortunate. I don't think I've seen a whole lot of what we'd call the ugly trial lawyers, but the aim of the podcast is to make it easier for injury victims and their families to find representation, but amongst true trial lawyers that actually try cases, that actually go in the courtroom. Because to be a settlement pro, as I explained to you, my philosophy, and I tell this to friends and neighbors and relatives that call me for referrals to attorneys. To be a true settlement pro, you've got to be a trial lawyer that goes in the courtroom. Otherwise, defendants do not respect you, and they will run over you, and your case will be settled for way less than it's probably worth and its true value. So if our injury victims and people in this country that are looking for this kind of help, if they want a fair chance at a fair result, and nothing can ever restore anybody back to where they were before a medical malpractice incident or some other type of accident. But if they want a fair result financially, you've got to get to a trial lawyer. So happy that you've agreed to join me. Where were you born, Dave? We're going to start right back at the beginning. Are you a native Oregonian?
I'm a fourth generation Oregonian, I'm proud to say. I was born in Newburgh, which is about an hour and 15 minutes from here in Pacific City. And grew up there. And I've also spent time, went to high school in Eastern Oregon in a little town called Milton Freewater, which when I was there was known for peas, wheat, and beets. And now it's known for wine, like everything else up there.
Yeah. Those farmers and ranchers have suddenly turned their crop growing land into vineyards, and they probably made a lot more money.
Yeah. So I spent 3 of my high school years up there, and then returned during college a couple of summers to work. And those experiences, actually, Jack, I'd tell you, allowed me, when I was defending cases all over the Northwest, really, to really enjoy going into Eastern Oregon and defending cases, because A, it's like shooting fish in a barrel, and B, I knew a lot of the people, and it's a different world east of the mountains.
Yeah, it is.
So just a year and a half ago, I think, or maybe it was 3 years ago now, Bob and I, my partner, traveled over to Vail and tried a case in Malheur County. So we've been known to do that. And, I went to University of Oregon, was lucky enough to play football down there in what I call the glory days of the mid 70s.
So back up for a minute though. I got to ask you something. How did you end up in Milton Freewater for 3 years of high school? What got you there?
Yeah, it was a lot of pulling and tugging by my parents is what got me there. But my father was the high school principal in Newburgh for many years, and took the superintendent position in Milton Freewater what was going to be my sophomore year. So my family, there were 5 kids, we all moved up there, and I still have a sister up there. So it was quite a change.
Wow. Yeah, I bet it was. So,
yeah, it was.
So your dad was the school superintendent?
Yeah.
And what did your mom do?
Well, she graduated from Merrillhurst College, which is probably not far from where you're sitting right now.
That's right.
And then she started having us 5 kids. And later in life, when we were kind of semi-grown, she worked downtown Portland at an old women's clothing store called Charles F. Berg.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But that didn't last long. And she was a homemaker, and she had her hands full with us 5.
So she spent kind of your late teenage years in Milton Freewater in Eastern Oregon, out in the farm country?
Yeah, every summer I worked in the peas, I worked in the wheat fields. In the spring, people don't remember this now, and I sound like an old guy, but they used to heat the orchards with what they called smudge pots. And smudge pots were like 5-gallon barrels of some mixture of diesel fuel and something else. And it was when it got cold at night, they didn't want the cherries and the apples to freeze.
Sure.
And so they would hire people dumb enough to go in the middle of the night and run down these rows between the trees, lighting these pots. I did that for a couple of years, and it wasn't for the money. It was just because all my buddies were doing it. It was kind of an adventure.
Sure. Out late
so,
at night.
Yeah, I did those kinds of things. And, athletics was a big part of my life too, up there.
Yeah. So you were playing football?
Yeah, I played football and finished my career at Oregon in 1976. And I always mention that because I'm a Duck through and through, and always will be. But I would not have gotten my first job as a lawyer without that experience.
Really? How come? How so?
Well, I went to the University of Oregon Law School, and one day they posted the interview list for the different law firms.
Yeah.
Eugene and Portland. And I'd worked throughout law school for a plaintiff's lawyer, actually, in Eugene. And he'd offered me a job to stay in Eugene, but my wife at the time was from Portland. So I thought, well, I'll put my name on one of these lists. And one of the lists was for Schwabe, Williamson, and Wyatt. And I put my name on the list, and my buddy was standing there, and he goes, Miller, you're not in the top 10%. What are you doing? And I said, well, what are they going to do? Tell me no? So I put my name on the list, signed up for a 15-minute interview. And that day I showed up in my JCPenney suit, went into the interview and introduced myself to a fellow by the name of Joe Willis, who was a partner at the Schwabe firm. And the first thing he said to me was, he says, I saw on your resume that you played football for the Ducks. And I said, I did. And about 45 minutes later, much to the chagrin of my two buddies waiting to interview after me, he said, well, let me look at your writing sample. And he looked at my writing sample and he says, you did this? And I said, yeah, I did for the lawyer I'm clerking for, Bill Wiswall. And he said, that was my case. I was defending that case and I lost that motion. And I had no idea, of course, who this guy was. And so anyway, I ended up, coming to Portland because of that experience. Honestly, I'm sure that's why Joe went to bat for me. And that ended up being really the thing that got me started in the law.
So in high school, did you think you wanted to be a lawyer then?
No. I mean, I figured I'd either be a pro baseball player or a pro football player like every other high school.
Yeah.
And then when you get out in the big wide world, particularly on a football field, and you look around at these guys, you realize, well, that ain't going to happen.
Yeah.
My older brother, Rob, who's a lawyer in Eugene,
right?
He was about that time going to law school, and I thought, well, maybe I'll give that a try. So I went to college as a history major, which doesn't prepare you to do much of anything, except perhaps go to law school. So that's how I ended up doing it. My brother actually tried to talk me out of it.
So what was that conversation like?
Well, we were in the parking lot at the Oakway Mall in Eugene. And this would have been in the late 70s, so probably 78, 79. I graduated in 82. And I told him I was applying to law school. And he said, Dave, you'll never make any money as a lawyer. You need to be a lumber broker. That's what you need to do. And I didn't know what a lumber broker was, although he told me that in those years they were making a bunch of dough. And I said, well, I'm not really interested in that, but I'll give it some thought. And I just went ahead with my application. And and it wasn't that many years later, there were no more lumber brokers to be found.
Yeah, no kidding.
So I was glad I did what I did.
Yeah, I had some friends that were doing that, and it lasted through about the 80s, and then it was done.
Yeah.
So you say you came from family of 5, and Rob's the oldest?
Rob's the oldest. He's 7 years older than I am.
And is there anybody between you and him?
Well, there was, sadly. We had a sister, Julie, who is 5 years older than I, and she passed away about 5 years ago.
Oh, sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
And what about the youngers?
Well, I've got my next sister, Sue, lives in Milton Freewater.
And what is she doing?
She's worked in one of the local elementary schools in the school district office for 45 years. She's married to a wonderful guy that was I think it's the only boyfriend she ever had. And he's an electrician up there, and they have 4 great now grown kids. So,
wow.
And then I have a younger sister below her, Kathy, who also worked, still does, in the Newburgh School District. and she has been there for almost as many years. So,
Oh.
yeah, education has run deep in my family.
So that's great. So you come through U of O Law,
Yep.
and you clerk for Bill Wiswall while you're going to law school the entire 3 years.
The entire 3 years. So Bill, my brother worked with Bill. He was one of the partners in the old firm it was called Lively and Wiswall. And I was married at the time and had a 1-year-old son, Gabe, who's now 42, also a lawyer. And so I needed to work. My wife was a school teacher at Willamette High School in Eugene, but we needed the extra money. And I just decided, well, during the time I wasn't in class, I would work out there, and then I'd come home and do what I needed to do with the family and study at night. So that's how I spent my 3 years in law school.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
I mean, it sounds more rigorous than it feels to me, Jack. I mean, there's plus and minuses about being young and having a kid. But to me, it was just the way it was. And we all had a great experience. And in fact, yesterday I was on a similar podcast with some people at the U of O Law School. They were trying to convince me to come down and not on the faculty, but to teach some courses in trial practice. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah. So your experiences as a defense lawyer.
Yeah.
You started with Schwabe in
82.
82.
September 13, 1982.
Wow.
Yeah, wow.
What did they have you doing when you first started?
Well, when I reflect on my career, like most people, it's a series of random events, just like being interviewed by Joe Willis. Completely random. I got to Schwabe and I was put in the litigation group. I was assigned a supervising attorney, one John Hart. And about 2 to 3 months into my career as a lawyer, John came in and said, well, a guy that's 2 years ahead of you, his name was John Fennerty, is quitting to join the Peace Corps. And behind me is a rolling cart filled with files of John's, and they're now going to be files of yours. And most of them involve cases, auto cases, that are going to go to trial in what was then called district court, which was a lower jurisdiction court that's now been merged into the circuit court, but
Right.
it was $50,000 and less, and 6-person juries. So about 2 weeks later, I was in a courtroom trying my first case.
And what was that like? First time in a courtroom?
Well, it scared the shit out of me, obviously. and it, the culture at that law firm, I mean, I love the people there still to this day. Wonderful people. There was a bar restaurant right at the basement of the Standard Plaza building, about 2 blocks from the courthouse. And in those days, before Schwabe moved to the new building, the Pac West building,
Yeah.
we had 3 or 4 floors in the Standard Plaza building, and if you were trying a case, you would come back at the end of the day, and half the lawyers were sitting down drinking beer or whatever, eating popcorn and waiting for you. And so I'd come in and I remember them greeting me, how was your first day, and teasing you, and but I learned more at Ryan's breadbasket than I ever could have learned anywhere else. I mean, the people that were surrounding me, Jack, in those days were, you talk about true trial lawyers. I mean, those guys, and I say guys because in those years there were no women trying cases to speak of. I can think of one that was Joan O'Neill in another law firm. But anyway, first trial, I got a defense verdict. I won the fender bender, and I was thrilled.
I'll bet. So
Yeah.
Was that pretty stressful?
It didn't take me long to get over that. I mean, I have never been aware of being stressed in the courtroom. I get stressed in the month leading up to a big case now. I still do. We all do. I don't care what people say, they all do. And, the best piece of advice John Hart ever gave me was, and John, I will say this to the day I die, one of the best trial lawyers I've ever known. And I've known some excellent ones.
Yeah, and you're not the only guy that says that. A lot
Uh,
of people give him that accolade.
so my job, other than handling these little cases, was working on his big cases and making sure he was ready, because he was going from case to case to case. And he said, Dave, as long as you get my ducks in a row, I'll take it from there. So I had to have subpoenas when subpoenas were necessary. And in short order, it was physicians, expert witnesses lined up for him. And trial lawyers will tell you, Jack, that the biggest challenge in presenting a case, it's not what to ask or how to cross-examine. It's the logistics of getting the people you need there. That's tough. And
Yeah.
once you figure out and get the right people to help you do that, the rest of it's just a competition, and I enjoy that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I must say, people always ask me that, a couple of questions. Number one, well, how many cases have you tried? And so lawyers always talk about that. And I was honored, I don't know how many years ago now, to be inducted into the American College of Trial Lawyers, and which is a honor for any lawyer to be a member of that group. And
Is there a certain level or standard that you have to meet to be considered? And then is it by invitation after that?
it's by invitation only. And they put you through and you don't know this while you're up for membership, because it's all done in secret. But one of the things you have to do to qualify is to have tried, I don't even know how many jury trials. I think at the time it was 50 or 100 or something. And so I remember the lawyer that was putting me up for membership strangely asked me one day, well, how many cases have you tried? And I need to know, we're trying to keep track of something. He gave me some BS reason. And I had, instead of, a little written calendar, I used to use the blotter sized,
Sure.
the big counters with a month at a time. That's why I remember September 13, 1982 as my start date. I saved all those calendars. And so I went back to them and I went through, and I always had my trials, yellow highlighted, and they all came back. And I don't know how many years I've been a fellow in the college, but at the time I counted, it was 200 and some jury trials. And so that's how I know how many I'd tried. The next question I'm asked is, well, why did you switch from being a defense lawyer to being a plaintiff's lawyer? And the answer dovetails nicely, because at a fairly young age, I'd tried well over 200 cases. And just that sheer volume over time takes a toll on you because it's a lot of work, a lot of travel. I tried a case in Jacksonville, Florida, which was a kick one time, and a couple cases in Idaho over the years, a case in California. Anyway, but the honest reason is, you asked about stress. When you're defending a case, if you win, the feeling is one of relief. You've dodged a bullet. It's better than losing, but it's not a particularly positive intrinsic feeling, dodging a bullet. But the first time I got a verdict for a plaintiff, never leaves you. Never leaves.
That's a discussion that I've had with others.
Oh, man.
I did one of these yesterday with an attorney from El Paso that'll be posted here in a week or two, but we went down the same path, and I have to say he got a little choked up talking about it too, because we're working for people who have had a really, really bad hand of cards dealt to them. And in the context of my discussion with him yesterday, we were talking about what it's like to go home at night and tell stories about your day around the dinner table. Yeah. And then we kind of got off into a tangent of, well, I wonder what it's like for defense counsel and adjusters. What do they tell their family about the case that they won that day, or where they maybe they chiseled some poor individual out of their back claim, or their leg off amputation claim, or their paraplegia claim. I mean, how do you celebrate that with your family as a celebration versus when we're on the plaintiff side of these cases and we're working for injury victims? And I mean, I know some stories, and I hope to hear a couple of them today, but we run into some just incredible situations and mediations where it's almost a Perry Mason type moment, if you will, that changed things. And all of a sudden we've gone from thinking we're looking into the abyss to, oh my gosh, we just settled this case, and for a number that we didn't expect, and it's going to be life-changing for that client.
Right. I mean, it's hard not to get emotional a little bit about it, because you never forget any of them. And I never take any of them for granted at all. But you form a bond with your client, and it's very real. And I'll just never forget the thank you. And, you feel like you've changed the status quo. And
well, you have.
Yeah. And changing the status quo for a person is a lot. I mean, think about it. And when you're defending, the whole goal is to maintain the status quo. And in fact, when you defend a lot of cases, you never really want to say it, but one of the themes is, well, things are supposed to be the way they're supposed to be. And it's sad, and he or she was dealt a bad card, but, is it really my client's fault? It's kind of this fate-based defense, and I've seen it used a lot. But on the plaintiff side, you got to change that. You got to convince 12 strangers that the status quo is only the status quo because that person did something wrong. And if you can do that, if you can convince them, and once you get them moving with the view that there was wrong that created the wrong, then you got it. And the feeling you get from helping people is, it's why we all do it.
Oh, yeah.
People say, oh, it was the money. Well, no, it wasn't. I mean, I and my partner can tell you too, it wasn't the money, particularly in the beginning. And, the other thing was a bad experience I had winning a case. I was in Payette, Idaho, and I was defending an oral surgeon in a malpractice case. And I won't use any names. And Payette, I will say, when we talk about conservative venues, that's Payette.
Yeah.
It's just across the border, basically, from Ontario. And this oral surgeon had had some difficulty previously at his hospital. And he had this woman who was in her 70s, probably, in his office for a wisdom tooth extraction at an advanced age, which isn't exactly a piece of cake. It's not like a teenager. And to make a long story short, he pulled her tooth. He gave her an anesthetic. He pulled her tooth, no complications. She didn't wake up. She didn't wake up. They tried to wake her up. She then urinated. No ambulance was called. He waited 20 some minutes before he called an ambulance. And she was taken to the hospital. They did a CT scan and she'd had a stroke in the recovery area. And she was in a wheelchair, very aphasic. She could not speak well. She was a wonderful lady. Her husband left her, literally left the marriage after many, many years, while she was in the care facility recovering. And her lawyer sued the oral surgeon, sued the hospital. So, I mean, I knew I was in trouble on the case, and we offered close to $1 million right up through before closing argument. And I told the judge, that's going to be the last offer. I think, honestly, Jack, it was something like $850 or $875 or something. And the plaintiff's lawyer looked at me and said, nope, it's going to take $9. And the judge looked at him in this conservative venue and said, I know where that other 25 can come from. He said, nope. And I said, well, as soon as we get up to give closing argument, it's off the table. He said no, so we went out, we argued the case. The jury went out to deliberate for many hours, came back and found my client negligent. And the second question was, did the negligence cause the injury? Which was my whole defense, that the stroke would have happened anywhere. And it wasn't made worse by the delay. And the answer to that question was no. There was no causation. So she recovered nothing. He turned down nearly $1 million, frankly, because of his own ego. And I remember looking over at her sobbing, with a paralyzed side, and it's never left me.
So what year was that, Dave? Do you remember when that went down?
Yeah, it probably would have been 98.
Ah. So it's very close to your epiphany.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's one of the things that did it. Honest to God, I've never, because I had that feeling you alluded to earlier. What do you talk about at the dinner table? I drove to the hotel to go to the Boise airport, fly home. I just felt like hell.
Yeah.
So as a defense lawyer, I mean, that happens sometimes. I mean, you do have feelings and you're human beings and all that, but that maybe affected me more than it would some others. But that was one of the reasons I changed.
Yeah. So what were some of the other things that happened between that case and the day that you actually made your decision?
A divorce. And,
but how does a divorce lead you to make a change like that?
Well, we were all partners. Everybody involved was,
I see.
Yeah. And
So it was more like leaving the firm you were with and going out to practice on your own.
Right.
Okay.
I had to get out of an uncomfortable situation, and it was best for everybody. I mean, and in retrospect, everybody knew it, and we tried hard. Both of us did, but it just, it was too hard. We had a child, we had those interpersonal
Sure.
tensions, and I was kind of headed this way anyway. And that was, I made the decision during the middle of a partnership meeting at Salishan. I just decided now's the time, and no pre-planning. I just said, can't do this anymore. I'm going to be a plaintiff's lawyer.
So you leave Salishan over at the coast.
That's true.
And you're heading home?
I went, well, we had a break in the meeting, as you might imagine. And I suppose it's been so many years I could speak freely about this, but John Hart and Mark Wagner and Bob Wagner and Jim Martin.
Oh yeah.
Said, come on, we're taking you to the bar. You're overreacting. We need to talk you out of this. And I knew in my heart, Jack, it was the right thing to do. And we had a nice talk. We'd gone down many roads together, and they were literally like brothers to me. I still feel that way. And I said, nope, you guys enjoy the rest of the meeting. You're going to be just fine, and I'll figure this out. And I did. And it wasn't many days thereafter that Bob came talking to me, and we made the decision to do it together and haven't turned back.
Wow. So you come back into town and you start looking for space. And so then how did you get your first plaintiff's case?
Well, it was my first plaintiff's case was a car crash. And Jack, it kind of foretells my career since then. A longtime claims adjuster that I had tried many cases for called me and was so excited. That was the neat thing. The insurance people I had worked for were thrilled that I was doing this.
And did you expect that it would probably be the other way around and that you would encounter slings and arrows from that side?
I really didn't know what I really thought, and what has proven true, is that when I have a case against those people now, I get the royal treatment. They don't miss turning over a rock, and I know I got a fight on my hands. So, and that goes with the territory. But she referred a kind of a shirt tail relative to me. And, gee, a car crash case, this might be $100,000 case. So I met with her and asked her when the accident was, and we were just short of 2 years. The statute was going to run the next week. So I put a complaint together, filed it, and served it on the defendant. It was an individual. It was a doctor at OHSU. And so away we went, and I got a letter from a defense lawyer who says, well, I'm going to be defending him. I need an extension, the usual thing we do.
Sure.
Well, I won't bore the viewers with all the rules, but you want to kind of get that nailed down within 60 days of filing the complaint, because the statute had run in the meantime. And so I call the lawyer, and he kind of drags his feet, and on like the last day he says, Dave, I'm going to file a motion. You didn't personally serve my client. I said, what are you talking about? I have an affidavit from the process server right here saying I personally served your client. He said, well, he's going to deny it. So he files a motion. We go to in those days, you find out who the judge is. And I found out who the judge was, and it's a well-known plaintiff's lawyer in Portland. And my first reaction as at that point, a very experienced, now former defense lawyer, I saw the judge pro tem, and it's a plaintiff's lawyer. And I went, God, I'm done. This is it. My first case, it's a malpractice claim. And then it hit me. Now, wait a minute. I'm on the plaintiff's side. So I go over to argue the motion, and I'm not going to name who it was. He's still around, but he looked at the defense lawyer and says, "Are you serious? You delayed, and then you came in at the last second and tried this stuff? Denied." So,
Yeah.
as a defense lawyer, you rarely think about committing malpractice, missing something, doing something that could get you sued. But boy, as a plaintiff's lawyer, you do.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
so
no.
my first case, I learned a lesson, and we ended up, going on to settle the case, and everything kind of took off from there.
So then, how long was it before you got your first medical negligence case? Walked in the door, was referred in.
Well, I had people calling me, wanting me to associate on cases. And very experienced plaintiff's lawyer we both know well called me and said, "Hey, I want you to help me with this case." And I said, "Okay." It was in Eugene, and it involved a young girl with a undiagnosed condition that led to a severe brain injury. And so I said, "Great, I can't wait." And I took all the depositions of all the doctors, and they ended up paying, the defense ended up paying the policy limits on the case. And that had a lot of meaning because he gave me the chance to do that, and I learned a lot through all that. One of the things I learned, Bob and I were in this little cheap office we were subletting, and our secretaries would, literally dish out pencils and pens to us, ration it out to us. And this policy limits demand was time limited. In other words, you pay your $3 million by 5 o'clock on November 19, or we're coming after you for more than that, basically. You know the drill.
Yeah.
And so at about 5:05 that day, Bob and I are sitting around, and I said, "Well, I guess they decided they're going to try it." And the phone rings, and I answer it, and it's the defense lawyer in Eugene, and she's just frantic. She said, "My fax won't go through. I can't get the fax to go through." And Bob he heard it, and he looked at me and he says, "Oh, the fax has been broken for a week. We can't afford to replace it." And she had sent the fax to say that they were accepting the offer of $3 million or whatever. I think it was 3. And but boy, she was panicked. And the lesson I learned was, keep your fax machine operational.
Yeah, keep your equipment working.
Keep your equipment working.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I know you've had some really phenomenal cases in your career on both sides.
Mhm.
And there's one in particular that I wanted to ask you about today, that I think has had a big influence on Oregon law. The little guy down out of Klamath Falls.
Yeah. Tyson Horton.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that situation and how that all played out, because that's that's a famous case, and I think it's changed some things.
Yeah, it's a uniquely Oregon case. Jack, I'm just going to ask you point blank: is your audience mostly lawyers, or is it just people in the community?
This podcast is distributed out to 25,000 trial lawyers.
Yeah.
And then it's published on all the regular venues for future reference by individuals looking for attorneys. So when we get this thing out there, it'll be out there for a while.
So in Oregon, we have a statute that provides special protections and limitations to public bodies. And it harkens back to the old concept of sovereign immunity when public entities had no liability because they were public entities. Well, that changed. Sovereign immunity was abolished, but certain entities were given protections, like the amount of damages you can recover are capped at a certain level. And the single biggest hospital in Oregon is at the medical school, the only medical school we have, Oregon Health Science University. And that institution is subject to that cap on damages, which, believe it or not that many years ago, the non-economic or pain and suffering component of damages allowed under that statute was $250,000 per claim.
Yeah, I remember that.
Well, the governor actually appointed a group of people to to study how we could best come up with a more equitable cap. And I was one of the plaintiff's lawyers on the committee, and there were representatives from OHSU involved. And anyway, we negotiated a cap, and it was I think $1.5 million was what everybody agreed to per claim. But if there was more than one claim, there was what we call an aggregate cap of $3 million. Okay, so for a variety of reasons I won't get into, the $3 million applied to young Tyson's case. At age 6 months, Tyson was diagnosed with a primary tumor of his liver. And his folks, Steve and Lori, lived in Klamath Falls. And again, ironically, Lori worked at the hospital down there. And Steve worked for a company that is now no longer there called Geldwen.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And Merle West was the hospital.
Merle West was the hospital, right. And so Tyson was sent up to OHSU, and the plan was to give him chemotherapy to shrink this tumor of his liver. And then once they shrunk it down, the pediatric surgeons would go in and take it out. And it was a type of tumor that, if successfully taken out or resected, was virtually 100% curable. So while his parents were in the waiting room, he went through the chemo and everything and successfully, and they took him to surgery. And unbeknownst to the parents, the primary surgeon, who was a longtime OHSU pediatric surgeon, had working with him a young, fellow or resident surgeon. And they were in the process of cutting out or resecting this tumor, and she managed to cut all of the supporting structures, the vessels, the nerves, the ducts, everything connecting the liver, really, to the rest of the body. Cut off the blood supply. It was a complete disaster. So Tyson was on the table forever, and they saved his life, transfusions, reoperations over the next couple of days, but it was a fatal condition. You can't live without a liver. The nearest facility that could help in any way was Stanford, by way of a pediatric liver transplant. So he was shipped down there with his mom in the airplane with him, being transfused the whole way down. His mom ended up giving part of her liver to save her son's life. She then had complications from her surgery. So between the two of them, their medical expenses alone at Stanford were approaching $6 million. So we had $6 million in just medical expenses.
Wow.
Plus, and a cap on damages of $3 million. We didn't think that was equitable.
Yeah, not fair.
And I'm the farthest from being a constitutional lawyer, but there were arguments to be made under the Oregon Constitution that that cap was unconstitutional. And so we tried to get it settled, couldn't, and we went to trial with the lawyers for OHSU. Here's one for you. The lead lawyer for OHSU, Mike Wiswall. Mike being the son of Bill Wiswall, the lawyer I clerked for in law school.
Small world.
Small one. I actually hired Mike at my former defense firm. He's a great lawyer himself now, great guy. Anyway, he admitted fault, admitted liability. And we tried the case for a couple of weeks, and the jury came back with a verdict of $12.2, I think, million. And Mike had actually urged the jury to award $8 million. So both of the numbers were well above the $3 million cap. And OHSU decided that they would appeal that. They were trying to enforce the $3 million cap. And we have in our statute a direct appeal in those situations from the trial court directly to the Oregon Supreme Court, bypassing the Oregon Court of Appeals. And so it went to the Supreme Court, and in a very, very controversial ruling, the Supreme Court affirmed or kept in place the $3 million cap. So all Tyson was able to recover was the $3 million. And that then had a ripple effect on other cases. Lawyers, defense lawyers, and insurance companies took that decision and argued that, well, that reasoning should apply to cap damages on other cases. That, of course, has now been found to be a fallacy, and we have no caps on other cases. So I tell clients, if you want to sue OHSU, your damages will be capped. It's a graduated thing over time. So the cap is now, I think, $2.2 million, up from 1.5. Any other hospital you want me to sue, there's no cap. So it's a little bit nutty, but that was the effect of it. Tyson, I think Tyson's like a fourth grader now. He's living with his mom's transplanted liver. He's doing quite well. He will need a new transplant in a few more years when he gets a little bigger, and he'll likely need another transplant after that sometime in his life. So I thought it was a terrible decision for obvious reasons, but we're stuck with it for the time being.
For the time being. Well, it was, it's an important decision in that it opened the conversation, and there was a lot of conversation. That's for sure. And, my hope is that it gets revisited.
Yeah.
And,
well, it has already, Jack. I mean, there was a decision in a case of our friend John Coletti's case just within the last 6 months. It's not an OHSU case, but the question of whether there was going to be any cap on non-economic or pain and suffering damages on a non-OHSU injured plaintiff, and that was not a malpractice case. Johnny's case is not a malpractice case. And in finding that no cap would be applied, no cap on damages, the opinion of the Supreme Court now, which has been largely reconstituted with retiring judges and such, repudiates the reasoning in Horton, which was small consolation when I got the phone call from Lori Horton, and she heard about it and wanted to go back to court. And I had to tell her we couldn't do that. And but, such is the vagaries of the law. You can only do what you can do.
well, and, the there's no discounting the effect that Horton had on a lot of different minds out there, including people who later ended up on the Supreme Court.
No question.
Yeah.
You know, I'm gonna tell a little story that the dissent in Horton was written by Martha Walters, who was a longtime Eugene lawyer before she went on the bench. And it's a 280 some page opinion. And my client, Lori Horton, Tyson's mom, read every page of it. And what she said to me after she read it was, Dave, you know, the only judge, and there were like 3 opinions, the majority opinion, 2 concurring opinions, and the dissenting opinion. The only judge that used Tyson's name was Judge Walters. And she and I were on a panel months later that the Oregon Law Review put on, and there were scholars from around the country, constitutional scholars, coming to debate Horton. And, you know, they invited me, I guess, to have somebody to laugh at as the lawyer that lost Horton.
Oh, come on.
No, but I went up to her. She was there. She was on the panel. And I told Judge Walters that story, and it brought a tear to her eye. And she is now the Chief Justice of the Oregon Supreme Court. So I don't have any doubt if we were back there, it would have gone the other way.
Yeah. Well, that just demonstrates these are real people.
Yep.
Our clients with real names. And it's a shame that that many times that gets forgotten, and it, you know, they become a number or just another claimant, which is unfortunate. So other than the Horton case,
other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play?
Well, man, you're you know, it may not have turned out immediately the way that would have been fair for Tyson and the way you hope, but there's a lot of good that came out of it anyway. And
you know, Jack, one of the things I remember most about the trial, I mean, you know, trial lawyers remember weird stuff, but part of my preparation, of course, was to talk to the pediatric liver transplant surgeon at Stanford. And these people do not grow on trees. There are not many of them around. And forget his proper first name, but he went by Chip, and his last name's Bonham, Bonham. And I asked him, you know, lawyers trying to get doctors from other states to come testify live for you is always a challenge. And he said to me, I'd do anything for that family. He flew up here. I said, well, we'll, you know, buy your plane ticket and put you wherever you want to be. And he says, nope, I have family up there. I'm coming and I'm going to see them and I'm going to do this. He spent 3 days in Portland. There were some delays associated with the trial. And he got on that witness stand and boy, I'll tell you, you could hear a pin drop as he talked about receiving part of Lori Horton's liver from one operating room while he had this baby opened up in the other operating room, and putting a piece of liver a little smaller than a playing card into this child to save his life. And then talking about the challenges Tyson would have throughout his life. It was very powerful. And, you know, when you run into professionals like that, you never forget it. He's a special guy.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. So from the rest of your case list, any other particular, I'm going to ask you about a win and then a loss. But any, I don't count Horton as a loss. but for all the reasons we've kind of alluded to. But anything else? Any other cases stick out in terms of
Oh
on the
yeah.
win side?
Well, yeah. In terms of verdicts, how many years ago it's been now, but we represented the family, Jack, of a woman who had gone in for surgery in a smaller hospital an hour from here, a little town called Silverton. And she was a hernia surgery. It was nothing terribly complicated, but at the end of the surgery, there was a complication. They had to take her back to repair a small hole in her bowel. And when they repaired that, they put a catheter in called a central line. And the catheter goes in an artery along here and goes down. And it's supposed to go down next to the heart. Well, this catheter they managed to put into the heart. And the x-ray after they put the catheter in plainly showed it in the heart. And one of the things they do with this catheter, Jack, is put liquid food in it so that the patient doesn't eat and stimulate the bowel, which had just been repaired. So they feed them through this catheter. So the next morning they started feeding her through this catheter, and because it was in the heart, was trapped and it filled the area between the sac around the heart and the heart, called the pericardial space, and suffocated the heart, stopped the heart from bleeding, from beating, and she died.
Oh man.
She died with her son having driven down there to pick her up and take her home that morning. So we filed a wrongful death case. Yeah. There was an autopsy done by a longtime pathologist here in Oregon who we all know, a forensic pathologist who recently passed away. And as we're getting ready for the case, at some point, Bob or I called him and says, well, Doc, we want to see the heart. And a couple of days later, he called back and said, well, I can't find it. We lost the heart. And that presented some challenges, but he eventually found it in his garage.
In his garage?
Where he stored years worth of interesting parts in formaldehyde containers that were related to matters he was involved in litigation on as an expert. And thankfully he found it, and we were able to make some hay with what it showed. But there's a cap on wrongful death cases in Oregon. I know you know that, Jack, but
Yep.
Many don't. So that a person who dies as a result of medical negligence, the pain and suffering that the family can recover for that loss is capped at $500,000, which again is a huge inequity, but it is what it is. And she was retired, so she really had no economic losses. And so we told the family that the most we could get was 500 grand. We tried to settle it. They wouldn't pay it. So we started taking depositions, and the physician, the surgeon, just one of these guys that had trouble telling the truth. And over the course of the case, we had reason to believe a claim for punitive damages might stick. So the judge allowed us to add a claim for punitive damages. And we got to trial, and his appearance was even worse at trial. He was blaming everybody else for not telling him how long the catheter was. He denied looking at the x-ray despite the fact his initials were on the report. In fact, I cross-examined him late one afternoon, and my partner wrote down all the different things and people he blamed. There were like 17 of them. So that night, I had my wife sit down at the computer and put them all on a list. I came in the next morning and put them up on the board. And all right, doctor, now yesterday you told this jury that these 17 things or people were to blame for what happened to our client. I just want to make sure we didn't miss anything. Well, there is one more thing. And by the time he was done, there were like 6 more things I'd written. And the jurors, Jack, were just cringing. Like, how many more people can you blame? And so we got a verdict for as much as we asked for. It was the prayer, including $2 million in punitive damage.
Wow.
But that's not the great part of the story. Our client,
There's more.
Our client, the surviving son, was an adopted son out of what used to be called the Waverly Children's Hospital here in Portland, or Waverly Children's Home. In fact, his sister, the other child of the deceased, was also adopted out of the Waverly Children's Home. So we got the money. My client said to Bob and I, I think I'm going to give some to the Waverly Children's Home. And we were thinking, kind of really be nice, maybe 10 grand or something. He gave to the place he was adopted out of $100,000.
Oh, wow.
Out of the award. And they named the gym after her, Faye Jager. And to be able to, to see that in his eye and his sister's eye, to be able to do that for them, that just meant a lot to us.
Wow.
So, I mean, there was that. There was a few years ago, a young guy who was rendered impotent as a result of some low back surgery. And the doctor that had committed the malpractice, Jack, he didn't think he did anything wrong. They defended it to the hilt. There wasn't a penny offered. We went to trial. And, again, he just was egotistical. And the part I remember is my partner asking our client, Jason, does your penis work? He couldn't answer the question. But there was literally this awkward silence. And so, he was in his 30s, big, looked like an offensive tackle, big kid, worked construction in Coos Bay, grew up Marshfield High School, And so his wife had to get on the stand and talk about it. And Jason, was sitting behind us, just couldn't keep it together. And the jury awarded us $4 million again, which was the prayer, what we were asking for. And I really felt good about that because he was entitled to it, every dime of it. And it changed their life. So,
wow.
Yeah. I mean, all lawyers who try cases have those stories. And you said in the lead in that if you don't try cases, you really can't settle cases. And boy, you're right. What happens for those who don't try cases is if you've got a case with a policy limit of $1 million, you might get a $900,000 offer, but they'll never pay you the policy limits. But if you've got some trial experience, you're in a different category, I think, and I'm proud of that.
Man, that's great. Yeah, I feel pretty strongly about that. My statement that to be an effective trial lawyer, someone who can get good settlements, you've got to have a track record of being in the courtroom.
Well,
but you don't win them all, Dave.
No, of course not. And you hear the stories about the people who say they've never lost. And the adage, if you've never lost, you've never tried one. And there's a lot of truth to that. The case we worked together on last year, Jack, in Eugene, for a variety of reasons, I can't talk in detail about it much, but it involved a young first-time mom. She nearly lost her own life. She lost her uterus.
Yep.
Tough cases. People go through a lot of tough things. And I saw her not long ago, and I almost didn't recognize her, Jack, because she was able to put a lot of this behind her now, and different person.
Yeah, these, well, we talked about earlier, it's life-changing.
Yeah.
It's life-changing. In my family, and I told this story at a lawyer conference in San Antonio last November, it's a year ago. And I was there to speak about, as a Medicare expert, and how to help plaintiffs avoid these Medicare issues, or at least minimize them. But I was so influenced by what I had just heard in terms of stories, that I decided to start off my presentation by talking about my own experience. I was a plaintiff in a fender bender. I was represented by a Schwabe attorney, by the way.
There you
go. So I've been through the process, and then I've had family members. A cousin, my sister, my best friend killed in a drunk driving accident. My little brother hurt in an industrial accident. My grandmother rear-ended here in Portland. And that case went to trial, and it doubled the record jury verdict in Multnomah County at the time for a rear end accident.
Wow.
And it came in at over $1 million. And it was an interesting experience for me, because it was the first trial that I got to sit through from beginning to end. Normally, when I'm in the courtroom as an expert witness, I just, I come in and then I go out.
Right.
You can't hang out. So it was an eye opener. But many of us have lived this. We know what it's like. One of my best friends and a guy at my wedding, who worked with me at the investment advisory company downtown that I came out of to specialize in this particular niche in late 85, early 86. In 95, he was involved in an accident on Delray Beach, where he ended up with a broken neck, and he's a C2 vent dependent quad. And so, we've got lots of clients in that position, lots of quads and paras, but being close to him and his wife and his kids, and knowing, what he's had to deal with. And by the way, he was on the job when this happened. He was with his boss from US Bank, and they were at a conference. So he got comp coverage. So
Right.
He's had all of his medicals covered, and workers' comp, and things have turned out really well for him in that regard. But just to talk to him about what he's gone through, and some of the issues, and some of the thoughts, it's been an eye opener. So, it's a transformative situation, and I feel really blessed that we can come in on the end of these cases where you guys have managed to get these tremendous recoveries for a lot of these folks, and we're able to help them minimize these Medicare issues, and then in some of these cases help them organize their settlement in a way that they've got faith that their settlement's going to last as long as they do. Because that's one of the big questions I get is, we just come out of a mediation, and there's been a mega $1 million agreement. And then 3 days later, I may be meeting with the plaintiff, and they've done the math, and they're saying, hey, after everybody's paid here, and all the liens and all the bills are paid, is this enough to take care of us? Because I'm not able to work again. And I mean, that's a startling question to get from somebody in
Right.
that position. So it's very rewarding to do this kind of work. And I tried my own traffic ticket case once
How'd you do, Jack?
in Clackamas County. And actually I started in Lake Oswego Municipal Court, and I lost, and then I appealed it and ended up in the appeal out in Oregon City with Judge Jack. And
Yeah.
oh my God, I prepped so hard for those cases, and I had everything down, and it was just, I remember my tongue broke out in canker sores. I was so, just uptight and stressed from thinking about facing the judge and putting on this evidence and getting my witnesses up there. But it was a great experience, and it really gave me an appreciation for what you guys do when you get locked down into a case like this, and you end up preparing for a month or two, and then you're in trial for 2, 4, 6 weeks. And your families have to, give up. I mean, they don't see you for a while. And even when you're out of the courtroom, you spend the rest of the evening grabbing a bite to eat and getting ready for the next day and lining up witnesses and testimony and burning the midnight oil. I mean, it's just a crazy existence. So,
Well, people, just friends or acquaintances, you'll be out for dinner, having a beer or something, and telling stories about your day, and people frequently ask, man, how do you do that? How do you listen to those stories? I mean, how do you? And so I've kind of come up with this when I talk to clients. I say, you're going through the worst thing in your life right now. And they are, and that's why they're here. And people who ask about it, I say, just imagine the worst thing you've ever been through in your life. And imagine talking to 3 or 4 people in one day who've been through or are going through the worst thing in their life. And it really drives it home. I've used that with jurors. And as soon as you say that, you just see the wheels start to turn. I represented a family of a young woman, freshman at the University of Oregon, who died from meningococcal disease, a meningitis disease, when they had an outbreak in Eugene a few years ago. And she was a student athlete on scholarship as a acrobatic tumbler, just an Olympic caliber athlete, African-American girl from Atlanta, recruited to Eugene. And I'm going to give a plug for the lawyer I was trying the case with, Eldon Rosenthal. And I told Eldon what he would be best at is to give the rebuttal argument at the very end of the trial. So I tried the medical part of the case, and I gave the opening argument at closing. And part of the evidence involved this young girl being in the emergency room in the middle of the night with her athletic trainer with symptoms. And the whole case was that the emergency room doc said, "Oh, go back to the dorm, go to sleep, you just have the flu." She was on and off the phone with her mom in Atlanta that night in the ER. And by the time she was discharged, she says, "Mom, my phone's about dead. I'll call you when I wake up." So she went back to her dorm and got back about 4:30 in the morning, and she was found essentially dead at 1 o'clock that afternoon. And the jury heard from everybody involved, from the paramedics to the trainer to her roommate to everybody. And Eldon stood up in that rebuttal argument and said, the only person we haven't been able to hear from is our client, Lauren. She never did get to call her mom. And boy, it was powerful, because you could see all those jurors, as a parent, Jack, it's that phone call you get or the phone call you don't get, it strikes you deep.
It strikes you deep.
She was a great kid, and
Yep.
jury did the right thing. So it ended up, just friends now in Atlanta.
Yeah. Well, great stories. So, used up a lot of your time today. I really appreciate it. I got 3 questions left for you.
All right.
All right.
I got time.
We'll wrap up.
All right.
So these aren't necessarily case related, but I'm going to throw them at you. First one is, David Miller, what are you most appreciative of in your life right now, today, right here?
My parents.
Your parents.
Oh, yeah. No brainer. I mean, we all ought to think about that. Where would we be without our parents? I mean, my dad worked in schools as a teacher and a school administrator, and worked his ass off his whole life. And my mom was a homemaker and took great care of her 5 kids. And we've all gone on to have professional careers. And I've been really lucky to do well doing what I do. And I think about them every day.
Wow, that's great. Are they still alive?
No, that we lost them both. Somebody asked me the other day, and I had to actually sit down and do the math. My dad died about 10 years ago, and my mom died about 8 years ago.
Wow, man, that's great. What an honor.
Yeah.
So, next question. What principle or cause or issue do you feel so strongly about that you would literally get up and do battle over, fight over?
Well, apart from, doing anything as any parent would for their kids, and in my case, grandkids. I mean, just the social, cultural issues. I mean, I know, Jack, somebody tunes into this podcast, it sounds corny, but people don't realize the importance that jurors have in our society. It's the great leveler, and people moan, well, I can't believe the jury awarded this amount or that amount to some lady who spilled hot coffee on herself in the drive-thru at McDonald's. Yet when you really look at all that those jurors did the right thing.
Yeah.
If you really look at all the facts, and these cases we see about on the news, the political related cases, these jurors have a tremendous amount of pressure on them, and they go and they make these decisions. And sometimes you don't agree, sometimes you do agree, but it's the ultimate way to make decisions. And it's not perfect, but what way is? I mean, I am a real believer in the jury system, and that would be worth fighting for.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I shudder to think what it would be like if we lost that component.
My physician clients, Jack, my physician clients used to say, well, I should be judged by 12 physicians, 12 surgeons, 12 neurosurgeons, whatever the specialty is. And I would just tell them, I got news for you. A group of those 12 laymen that you might find down at the Rose Festival Fun Center, there's your jury. They're going to be a hell of a lot more fair to you than 12 of your peers would be. Because you put 12 of your peers in there, they're going to have jealousies, they're going to have attitudes, they're going to have egos, and they're not going to be as fair to you as a jury will be. And I really believe that.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so final question.
Yeah.
If your career, even your life, was to be condensed into one sentence when it's all over, what would that one sentence be?
Well, I hope it would be that this guy who came from modest means got the most out of what God gave him. That's simple.
That's another great one. Oh man, I'm humbled just to even think about that, because it becomes a measuring stick for the rest of us that are listening to this.
Well, I mean, I mean, I could go on, Jack. I could do a whole podcast on my kids, for Christ's sake, and how great they are, and how great my wife is, and how great my partner is. We've rarely said anything about Bob, but that's the other great thing about what we do. We're sort of fungible now in my practice, and every case we try together. And any trial lawyer will tell you that trying a case with somebody else, they hate it, because no two people think alike, and it's a matter of rhythm and predicting what's coming and anticipating. And Bob and I, we're totally different guys, as you well know.
Oh yeah.
But I look over at his legal pad when I'm done questioning somebody, and everything's crossed off. And when he's cross-examining somebody, mine's all crossed off. And that's been a true joy for me.
That's rare.
Well, it is rare.
Yeah.
And we're really lucky, and that's why we have no intention of slowing down.
Good. Well, I'm glad you aren't, because we need you guys to stay on the job. There's people out there that need you. So Dave Miller, you're a true settlement pro, and congrats on making it through the podcast with me. Glad you could do this. And thanks for taking the time, and thanks for being a tough fighter for the rights of injury victims. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for including me, Jack.
Yeah, really appreciate it. So that's it for today, folks. This has been another podcast from the Settlement Pros podcast. And again, I'm your host, Jack Milligan. And this podcast is sponsored and brought to you by the SPI Group of companies. 3 companies, 3 goals. For trial lawyers who want to learn how to increase the size of their settlements and verdicts while shortening the time it takes to actually get paid, and then help their clients plan and protect their settlements to last a lifetime. We'll be with you again soon with another version of the Settlement Pros podcast. Take care, everybody.